Hello, everyone. This is Jeff Risdon from the Detroit Lions podcast and Lions Wire coming at you with a mailbag. I'm recording this on Easter, so happy Easter, happy Passover, whatever you celebrate. Hope you're enjoying it very well. Let's get this, man. We got a draft coming up in a little under 3 weeks. And put out a call in the Patreon Slack for the podcast channel, and I got a ton of questions, more than I can answer on here. And I thank you all for the questions. It is indeed the best $5 per month you can spend to get the most intelligent Lions chat on the internet, or anywhere for that matter. And we do a pretty good job of reining it in and keeping it on topic, though there are some other fun diversions that you can go to, like the barbecue channel, the memorabilia channel. Even the off-topic channel has some fun stuff in it. But let's get to some of these questions. First up, from Tradebakistan. Very good screen name, by the way. Lions more likely to trade up or trade down in round one? It's a good question. My inkling is that they're looking more to move down than up, but that's with number 6. With number 18, I think they're more likely to move up than down. And that puts you somewhere in the 10 to, let's say, 9 to 14 range. And what they'll get in that range is probably a more desirable landing spot for a player like Witherspoon out of Illinois, or that second-tier pass rusher if Tyree Wilson is somehow there. I don't think he will be, but he would fit in that range. Possibly a guy like Nolan Smith. Or maybe even Deonte Banks if they're not sold that he's going to last to 18. Or the other one that comes into mind is Darnell Wright. If you want to move up for him from 18, I think you're going to have to get in front of the Steelers to get him. You might have to get in front of the Commanders to get him. So I think so. I'll answer the question thusly: back from 6, up from 18. All right, next from Michael. If Brad does his patented double dip at a position in the draft, what position do you think it will be this year? That's a good one. Defensive tackle makes some sense, especially if they go one early, but I'm not sure that they're going to go early at that early at defensive tackle. I think they're going second, third round. If you can find a nose tackle late that would do it, that would make sense. Cornerback is the other one. With a strong potential, I believe, for a first-round cornerback. And then you take a more developmental guy that's in the 6th or 7th round. And I'm going to preclude this by saying right now, I'm aware the Lions do not have a 4th-round or a 7th-round pick currently. I don't expect that to stay the status quo. I think they're going to make some moves, whether they want to move back from a spot or move up or trade a 7th next year for a 7th this year. Those types of things happen all the time. So don't get hung up on the fact that they don't have a pick right now in the 4th or 7th round, because we're going to be calling guys 4th or 7th rounders, and they could very well be Lions, and that doesn't mean that they're not going to be here because they don't have those picks now. I like this one. This is from Greg. Hi, Greg. What is your gut reaction on what they end up doing with Jeff Okudah, assuming they decline his 5th-year option? I'll add in parentheses, I expect them to decline their 5th-year option on him, or wait until after the draft to decide it. And he gives some options here. So Greg says, A, package him as part of a draft trade. B, hold on to him until closer to the deadline. Or C, let him play out the year. Gut instinct here is that he probably gets traded. I think he's going to wind up having more value somewhere else. They brought in Cam Sutton is the only real long-term solution that they brought in at cornerback, at least signed long-term now. Still have Jerry Jacobs on the outside. Jerry has pretty much passed Jeff Okudah on the depth chart. I know most national draft analysts don't know that, but Lions fans know that. They established that status quo pretty well. See, one of the things that comes into play here is that Jeff Okudah is an outside-only corner, and I think that limits where he's at, because Emmanuel Moseley is also that, and I think Emmanuel Moseley being signed, if he's healthy, is better than what Jeff Okudah is. And I don't mean that as a slight on Okudah as much as I mean that trumping up Moseley. So I think if somebody wants Okudah in a trade as a pot sweetener, and I'm just making up a hypothetical. Let's say you want to trade 55 to get up to 38. and you include Jeff Okudah and a third-round pick next year instead of instead of 55 and a second-round pick next year, I think that's the sort of trade that he would be involved with. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that came out clear. Trade deadline is tough because if he's not playing in Detroit, I'm not sure that any other team is really going to have a lot of interest in him, especially on an expiring contract, and let him play out the year. The only hope that you would do that is that he somehow shows you enough that he's healthy, can stay healthy, and can stay productive long enough. Remember, he was really, really good at the beginning of last year, and then he tailed off. Some of that was injury-related. Some of that was just teams figured out how to attack him a little bit better once he was doing well. And I'm not sure that he can recover from that. So I think he's a good player. I think he's worthy of keeping if they want to keep him and giving him a chance to play for his next contract. I like that as an incentive. But I'm not sure that that value is going to be there as much as it could be in getting somebody else into that position for a long term, especially if they're drafting a first-round cornerback. The writing's on the wall for Okudah right there, and he might want to be out at that point too, and asked to be traded. So don't know that will happen, but that's certainly plausible. Let me go pick up one here. To Anthony B., who is one non-quarterback you'd be ecstatic if the Lions walked away with from the draft, and who is one guy you'd be pissed if they took, assuming they are picked at the general consensus market value. That's a very good parenthetical addition there, Anthony. I appreciate that because where guys get picked does matter in terms of how I will react to them. As an example, if they come away with Bijan Robinson at 18, I'm going to be ecstatic. If they come away with him at 6, I'm going to be pissed. Like to answer your question, both with one guy. In general, though, I don't see it with Will Levis. Oh, he's a quarterback, so scratch that. Yeah. Miles Murphy would be one that I wouldn't be happy with. I wouldn't necessarily be pissed, but I don't see it with him. He's a guy that to me is the exact same player now that he was when he walked on campus at Clemson and has never really gotten better at anything. And the length of time that he's been there and the athleticism that he's been blessed with, I'm not sure that book has many more pages to write in it. So I think he's solid, but I don't want him at 6 or 18. I don't value him nearly that highly. As for a guy that I would be ecstatic with, there's a lot. There's a lot of players that I really like in this draft. Witherspoon is one. The Dion Henley, going a little bit later as a day 2 linebacker, I think would make me very happy. I don't necessarily expect them to do that or to agree with that, but he's a player that I think would be a perfect fit for. Somebody on Twitter actually came up with, he's like DeAndre Levy, and I can't unsee that. I like that a lot, and I think that the Lions need a linebacker like that, somebody who's better in coverage, better in spatial awareness than what Derek Barnes or Malcolm Rodriguez are in that number 2 linebacker role next to Alex Anzalone. And I will say right now, I know people don't like Alex Anzalone as a number 1 linebacker. Tough toenails, the Lions do. You're going to have to get used to that. So that would be my answers. Let's see. Let's go down here. From Mr. Leva. Likelihood of 3 to 4 quarterbacks being taken in the top 5. Good question. I fluctuate on this one some. I'm very sold that there will be 3. I think C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, and Anthony Richardson will all be gone before pick 6. Will Levis is the struggle. And I'm not sold that he's not going to go there, but I'm also not sold that he's going to go in the top 15. Opinions that I've heard from conversations are that the evaluations are all over the place on him. I personally believe that he will be a Seattle Seahawk and that he will be the number 5 pick in the draft, but that's just my guess. I don't know that. But he fits a lot of what Pete Carroll really wants in a quarterback, and it's going to be... They're in a situation, much like the Lions, where they have a quarterback who played really, really well in 2022 after not playing well before that, and they seem more apt to want to proactively address the long-term potential quarterback over Geno Smith, over what the Lions are interested in with Jared Goff. And by the way, that's probably smart because I do think that Geno's track record is not anywhere close to as good as Goff's. So I get that. People try to make that comparison, and Like, Goff has been a really good starter at times in his Rams career. And he was certainly the last, 8 to 10 games of last year. He's shown much more sustainable good play than what Geno has over the course of his longer career. So that probably preempts a couple other questions on that. All right. I like this question. All right. From Full Metal Savage. First team to do a WTF, they took that guy in the first round? He says hard mode can't pick the Patriots. The Raiders are always really good at doing this. This is a team that took Cleveland Farrell at number 4 overall once upon a time. And they could pull the surprise again. They picked number 7. There's some dudes that they could take that I don't know if I'd be necessarily shocked that they do it, but I think some of their fans would be. A guy like Darnell Wright could go that high. That's probably a lot higher than what Raiders fans would like him to be taken there. Deonte Banks, maybe, but he's a legit first rounder. In terms of like illegitimate first round picks, in my mind, Tennessee, if they trade back, but I don't think they're going to do that. I mean, you're looking Pittsburgh, maybe. I don't know. I kind of think that the way that this draft is stacked, where it's not like super loaded at the top, and there's a pretty heavy like tier of guys that are going to be like number 10 on one team's board and number 30 on another team's board. I think and I think there's a lot of that in this draft, by the way. I think that's going to make it where you're not going to have the like, who the bleep is that guy until maybe 20, 22, somewhere in there. But yeah, that's just a guess. That's a good question. I probably need to think more about that one. Good question though. I like it. All right, from Jordan. Nolan Smith has almost the exact same combine measurables as Lawrence Taylor, height, weight, and speed. I get the injuries and lack of production, but why isn't he being talked about as more of a potential diamond in the rough pass rusher at number 6? And I will answer this because I just wrote the Nolan Smith scouting report this morning and had done a little bit of polish on the film review. Here's the thing with him. He's a great athlete. I'm not sold that he's a great pass rusher. This is a guy who had 12 sacks in 38 games at Georgia, playing the role that a guy like Azeez Ojulari got, I think, 16 in 1 year. He's just not that guy. He's a weird player, and I wrote this at Lionswire if you want to check it out. He's a very strange amalgamation of skills in that he's a power-oriented run defender playing edge. And I don't know how that works. He's a guy that I struggle with, quite frankly. I think he's very talented. I think he's a good leader. He's a good locker room presence. I think he would fit the Lions culture. But 12 sacks playing with almost exclusively single blocking with his athletic tools, that's kind of a flag to me. So I wouldn't consider him at 6. I'm not sure that I'd consider him at 18. He is much more of an outside linebacker to me, and the game has changed quite a bit, and this is the code to Jordan's question. In Lawrence Taylor's day, you could be that size. You could be a very effective pass rusher at 240 pounds because the offensive tackles weren't as big or as athletic as they are today, and the offenses weren't as sophisticated as they are today. So I do think that the ability for an undersized rusher like that and again, he's a speed rusher, but doesn't really use his speed. He relies more on power, and at 235 pounds with short arms, it's a tough way to make a living in the NFL. So he's a guy that I have flagged as somebody who could wind up being very good in the NFL, but also a guy that could wash out very quickly and not even get a second contract. And that I hate to be like ambiguous or waffle on a guy, but I legit don't know what's going to happen with him. I tend to not think that he's suited for Detroit. I think he is a straight 3-4 stand-up outside linebacker, and the Lions could use him in the role that they use Julian Okwara and are adapting James Houston to doing. But I will tell you right now that James Houston is already a better pass rusher only, than what Nolan Smith is. And I think if they're looking for that role, I think they already have that in James Houston. So I don't think he'd be a little bit superfluous in Detroit right now. That's just my thought, though. Let's see here. Let's go down here. I like this one from Scott. How prevalent is the use of sports psychologists in the NFL today? Listen to I forget. A different podcast used an acronym, and I can't think of what the acronym is, and I don't want to butcher it. Talk about Okudah and his struggles. Does using them seem to help? Yes, most teams do have them. The Lions rely more on them than most do. They have their special sports psychology department, and I can see the woman who runs it, and I can't think of her name, and that bothers me. But they do a lot of this, and the NFL as a whole does a lot of this. Some teams more than others. The Lions would be more in the upper echelon of this, and it's. I would like to say that I can speak eloquently about it, but it's an area that, quite frankly, is a little bit over my head. So I will just say that the Lions do use it, and they are trying to make it work with a lot of different players, not just Jeff Okudah. Let's see here. Oh boy. This one requires a stiff drink of ice water. All right. This is from Big Bad Fab. Whose desk I'm sitting at, by the way. Thanks, Fab. Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase do not suck. It's pretty undeniable that their college time together helped them professionally. Is the same true at other positions? Thinking specifically of Devon Witherspoon joining Kirby Joseph. Does that familiarity shorten the learning curve? I like the idea of bringing in college teammates. I do. Secondary, especially because there's so much communication that goes on, and a lot of the things that plagued the Lions secondary last year were miscommunication, communication issues, assignment responsibility issues, the dreaded MAs, missed assignments. I do think that their chemistry and their ability to play together would help shorten that specific part of the learning curve. Witherspoon, though, his game is pretty much NFL ready. He's a guy that he doesn't really need the safety help over the top. He's fast enough at 4.49 or whatever he unofficially clocked at because he gets into pads. He doesn't allow clean releases. He uses his size pretty well. One thing with Witherspoon, I think people think that he's this tiny guy. He is literally the exact same size as Darrelle Revis and plays a similar style. I think Darrelle Revis was pretty good. I'm not saying that Devon Witherspoon is Darrelle Revis. But if you think that that's too small to play that physical style of outside, there's some pretty prominent examples of Hall of Famers who have done it very well recently. Darrelle Revis being the most prominent. So I wouldn't read too much into the lack of size. He's 5'11 and a half. His arms are fine. His hands are fine. I'm not worried about that. But that's a good question. And it leads me to thinking of, you bring in, I'll use another example, Mozzie Smith. At defensive tackle, joining Aiden Hutchinson at defensive end. I am not Mozzie's biggest fan, but I think that that's a good idea if the Lions were to do it, to play him on the same side of the line and let them, develop those sorts of things. And I do think that, the terminology barrier that comes in, like you're learning a different language from what was spoken at Michigan to what's spoken in Detroit for the Lions. I think those sorts of things can definitely be aided and assisted by that sort of chemistry. So yeah, it's a good question. And I'll give the brief answer on that with what I said. All right. A lot of Witherspoon questions here. From Ben. Did Witherspoon's pro day do anything to move him into the prospect grouping and play at number 6? Or do you still think he's more likely an option for the Lions at 18? I will say this. I think he's always been in play at 6. I personally would be more comfortable taking him at 18 than 6, but if they take him at 6, I'm good with that. He is an absolute Aaron Glenn dream cornerback. And if it doesn't work, it's not because the Lions didn't do their research or did a poor pick or a reach here. He is that valuable. He is that good. He is that good of a fit that I think he's always been a consideration at 6. It's my personal evaluation that says I have a few concerns that would make me more uncomfortable at 6 than 18, but I think that's true for pretty much every player. And I do think that now if you do want to get Devon Witherspoon, you're going to have to take him at 6 or whatever you trade back from 6, as I mentioned earlier, to 9, to 12, something like that. I think that's, if they're trading back, I think they're going to be okay with the prospect of missing out on him. But I think if they really want him, they'll stay at 6 and take him. And I do think that he would be no lower than second on their list of options at number 6. Yeah, that's it. From Maddie K, I like this one because this cheers. If you could have a beer and conversation with anyone in the Lions organization, who would it be with and why? And my easy answer is Chris Spielman because he is my football hero. I grew up in Northeast Ohio when he was at Ohio State. He was a legend in the Northeast Ohio high school lore, playing for where he did it in the Massillon-Canton rivalry, which is a very massive deal out there. I grew up, idolizing Chris Spielman. He's my football hero. I have an Ohio State jersey of him, his number 36. I have a Lions jersey of him in number 54. He would be the guy that I would just love to sit down with. And aside from that, he's a pretty interesting guy outside of football too. He's had the Stephanie Spielman Foundation, dealing with his late wife's breast cancer and the fight through that. And I would just love to pick his brain on that. So that's a good one. And Chris, if you're up for it, I'll buy. From Chad Hale, this is a good question. Previously, you indicated that edge would be a lower priority for us as it's one of the strengths on the team. After stocking up on corners and free agency and the way this draft order seems to be trending, do you see the Lions targeting Tyree Wilson or another edge at 6? Yes, and this is something, and I probably should have done this a little bit more prominently. I walked that back. The thing about an edge not necessarily being the biggest need. It's still not the biggest need, but it doesn't. I think the Lions are in a situation where they're not going to worry that it's not a big need if the right player is there. And that right player could be Will Anderson. And I do think there is a chance he falls to number 6, that you don't have to trade up for him. Some of that deals with the fact that Tyree Wilson, who was asked about specifically here, I do think that there's a very legitimate chance that he winds up being drafted before Anderson for a couple of reasons. First is the experience that we just saw last year, Trayvon Walker going number 1 over Aiden Hutchinson and over Kayvon Thibodeau, who are much more accomplished college rushers and football players. But the Jaguars drafted the athletic potential, specifically the height, length, and speed of Trayvon Walker. Tyree Wilson has those attributes. He's actually better than Trayvon Walker in some of those things. And I do think that that's going to be very intriguing for certain teams. Not for all teams, but for certain teams. Will Anderson is coming off a year where he didn't necessarily play as well as hoped, wasn't as dynamic as expected to be, and I wonder if teams are going to hold that against him, and that would make him to be available at 6. Yes, I do think the Lions will consider an edge at 6. I don't think they're locked in on it, but they're certainly not going to be ruling it out. That's a longer question there. All right. Anand sent a series of questions, and dude, I love your questions. I'm only going to answer 1 or 2 of these though, because you got a nice flurry here. I might actually do a mailbag for Lions Wire where I write some of these out, and I will answer more of these, Anand, because I do appreciate you very much. Do you see anyone being extended before the season starts to get ahead of the market? And the 2 logical candidates here are Jared Goff and Jonah Jackson. And I will answer this by saying the restructuring Jack Fox's contract to free up more cap room is a completely unnecessary move unless they have something in mind. It's like the whole Brian Windhorst thing. Why did they do that? What are they thinking here? I don't know, but that would certainly make sense as to getting that extra cap money. And if they're extending Goff, one of the things that allows them to do is they can swallow a bigger chunk of that new extension this year and allot that cap room, so they'll have more in the future by making the little moves like that, like what they did with Romeo Okwara and Charles Harris. And by the way, I skimmed over this question, but it was part of another question. I don't think that both of those guys are on the team in the fall. I think one of them will be. Your guess is as good as mine as to which one it'll be, though. I think health will play a factor in that because now they're both affordable and both affordably cut. So, that's... to get back to Anand's question, though, Goff being extended is sort of an elephant in the room that hasn't really been talked about on, or to my knowledge, off the record much in the conversations that I've had with other people that cover the team or are close to the team. It's just one of those things where you bring it up and the conversation sort of stops, or the tone changes or something like that. It's weird, and I don't know what that means. I'll be straight up. I don't know if they're going to extend them or not, but I tend to think that that's going to be next year. But again, the moves that they made to free up all that cap room, they have something in mind. It's either extending a guy like Jonah or Jared Goff now, or they're going to roll it over to next year and absorb more of that time then, which means that they wouldn't be spending it now. But the doing it when they did, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So there's something going on there. Jonah Jackson, whether to extend him or not, and this is actually the subject of another question that's on here too. That's tough because this is a really good guard draft. You don't want to overpay your entire offensive line. You've seen the cap problems that has caused in both Dallas and Indianapolis, and to a lesser extent Cleveland. And I don't think that the Lions want to be trapped in that sort of like we have this incredible offensive line, but we can't afford good skill position players because of it, or we can't afford a good off-ball linebacker because of it. And I think that the Lions are going to be very wary of that. So I tend to think that if they're going to extend Jonah, it would be done. If they don't do it, I think before training camp starts, I think he's going to be a guy that they are willing to let walk away and possibly recoup a comp pick or something like that in 2024 when he signs for a big money somewhere else. And it's tough because he's a really good player and he's earned everything that he's gotten. And has earned the acclaim. He is a legit, viable Pro Bowl player. He's a very good fit for the gap style scheme that we run that under Hank Fraley, and I think Hank certainly likes him and has developed him nicely. But those are the tough decisions that you have to make as you're an improving team, and you've got more and more good players that you need to pay. You can't pay them all. Is offensive guard that big of a priority over extending Amon-Ra St. Brown? Or extending, giving Jerry Jacobs money if he earns it at cornerback, or Emmanuel Mosley, or C.J. Gardner-Johnson, who's on a one-year deal. Like, if you want to keep some of those guys that are at more critical positions, probably can't afford to pay your guard that much. And I know Big V, he will be gone, I would assume, unless he plays his brains out this year, and he could do that, by the way. But I think the Lions' plan here is that they're going to draft and groom the replacement for one, if not both, of those guards in this draft. Let's wrap this up because we're running up on time here, and I gotta get outside. It's a nice day outside. It's a beautiful day outside, by the way. I hope you're listening to this as you're walking around. If you're catching this on Sunday or Monday, looks like it's going to be a great week here in Michigan. So don't forget to take time and get outside and enjoy life a little bit. I like that one. Last one from Anand. I'll do this one too. What are you going to wear on the pre-Super Bowl podcast after the Lions make a deep playoff run? I like this shirt, the sweatshirt, a lot. I got this for Christmas circa 2014. It's still great. It still fits. I haven't outfatted that one yet, so I kind of like that. I like the Seatbelt Gang shirts that are available that we do in conjunction here with the podcast with Jerry Jacobs. Go to seatbeltgang.com and check those out. But I don't know, man. I don't want to jinx that. I am one of those weirdos. So when they got their first win in 2021, I was wearing one specific outfit, and I actually wasn't at home. I was at my daughter's basketball tournament, and I was watching it in public. And the next Sunday, I wore the exact same outfit, and I went to the exact same place, even though my daughter wasn't playing basketball, just to watch. It didn't work, but I am that kind of superstitious weird. If they had won like the week before on a close game with some fun ending, I'm probably wearing what I just wore. No, that's a little lame, or weird, but that's life in my head. Again, there's a lot of questions. I'm gonna write some more of these out because there are some good questions here that I skipped over. We're coming up on half an hour here, and that's probably longer than you wanted to talk me to talk on a monologue. So. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the questions. Again, if you want to get in on asking these sorts of questions, I do these exclusively through our Detroit Lions podcast Slack channel. It's a Patreon. It's $5 a month. It is absolutely worth it. Check it out. Continue to check out all the draft stuff that we're pumping out at both LionsWire and DraftWire, where I am now one of the two managing editors along with Kurt Popejoy. We've got some really fun things going on. Kurt is doing a fantastic job of spraying out 7-round mock drafts for every team. God bless him for taking on that responsibility because that is a chore, and he's doing a great job with it. Check out the Lions one that he just did. But we've also got all kinds of draft profiles and more feature commentary on certain guys, too, that you want to check out. So thanks again, and go Lions.